I'm Victoria. I know everybody's just catching up and talking to us. This is a recorded video. We are back with Kim Kennedy, Dr. Kim Kennedy. How's your day going?
Everything's going great. For those of you who know me and those who don't, I'm Kim Kennedy with Pocket Profe, and I'm dedicated to helping bilingual and dual language teachers in their practice through online coaching and courses and professional development.
And we were just talking. We are members of the Heritage Team Extraordinaire, and we have this really great project that the team has been working on. I have to take a step back and say the team, because for this particular project, I haven't had the chance to really delve deep, but I have taken sneak peeks, and I am just in awe, as I am in every single project. And I'm in awe of the collaboration, the amount of information, and the heart that goes into creating this project. Now, of course, we're talking about a specific project. It is, do you know the name of the project that we called it?
Pride Month 2021, LGBTQ plus Pride Month Awareness.
So we're still working on the title, as you can tell, but the biggest thing that we want to make sure that everybody understands is that our presentation is specific to reaching our educators and our students, whatever age range they are, to allow the teachers a tool that they can use to understand the vocabulary, the jargon that when speaking about the maybe current events or issues, or even having a conversation with an individual that may have questions about gender, sexuality, and most importantly, their identity, who they are and about connecting with their thoughts and ideas. I mean, as it is, we are in the education in the classroom. Let's take ourselves back to the seat when we're students, and we learn so much about who we are in the classroom.
It's so true. Yeah, and I think what you're saying about understanding how individuals self-identify is really important. And I think that's where a lot of our awareness comes in, especially if maybe talking about LGBTQ plus issues is outside of your comfort zone or something that you don't have a lot of knowledge about. It's a way to understand that a lot of it is understanding issues of representation and lack of representation. Yes. Are students seeing themselves represented in the figures in history that they're learning about? Are they seeing themselves represented in the books that are on the library shelves in the classroom and in their school libraries? Are they seeing themselves included in the language that's being used? And then also understanding that language evolves over time. And so a lot of these issues around LGBTQ plus vocabulary and identities, for example, gender identities, those conversations have come a really long way, even in the last 5, 10, 15 years.
Or even recognizing, Kim, you painted a really clear picture for me that, you know, it's having the language to talk about it, and even if as an educator we feel a little disconnected from understanding the words to use and what have you, it's this tool that we have created. And I say me, I'm including, because I am a member and I want to advocate for getting this information out there. We may not use it in the classroom. You may not even, if you're not comfortable, you may not use it in the classroom. We're going to show you how. We're going to talk about how to use it, but maybe you don't feel comfortable yet. Maybe this tool is going to be used later on your spare time to find out what the resources are, what language you want to use. In my mind, when you were talking about identity, and I think about a student may feel uncomfortable when there is constantly boy, girl, and maybe they start to have these, well, I don't quite fit, or I don't understand what I'm feeling when I keep going in this. Well, where do I stand? Well, having the tools to have those conversations and to even just recognize that, you know, the student or the child or whatever age, is having a question. And that starts the conversations, and maybe even just listening and how to listen. Yeah.
And even in those little ways, we might start to transform our practice to be more inclusive and to be more aware. So even that practice of boy-girl,
right?
A lot of times teachers might, I do that for behavior management or classroom management, where I just don't want everybody rushing to the door at once to line up. So I call boys and then I call girls. And it's like, well, there are a lot of other ways to be more inclusive, because there are more than one. Gender identity is not a dichotomy. And
absolutely.
That's what we're learning a lot about, especially with how we're seeing the language being more inclusive. And some people will shrug their shoulders or not understand or throw up kind of a wall and say, right. Oh, I can't keep up, and what do you mean? and so I think that it's like you said, even if you don't use this resource right away with students, right. Maybe it's a resource you can use to see your own professional and personal development around these issues, and kind of feel more comfortable about what we're talking about.
Absolutely. I wanted to share, we have a member that has taken, creating some of the slides for this presentation, and she shared with our group, and I thought it was so, speaks right to the message. Just to let you all know, this is a member, and this is what she shares about her understanding. My lens for this project was really about supporting the transgender and non-binary community, because this community is often one of the most marginalized groups. And I wanted to raise awareness for teachers and students, so our students know that they are not forgotten. It's important as educators to build a safe space for our students, specifically our transgender community, and support them. No child should ever feel excluded. And based on my research for this project, I wanted to find books and resources to inspire and celebrate the transgender community. It saddens me to learn about basic human rights, like bathroom use or medical care, being taken away from this community. So we get into these, we start framing our thoughts. And the reason why this project is so powerful is because we've got teachers engaged, they're speaking from their heart, that are looking for resources. And though we may not always get it right, trust me, we're working, and we may not always have the right answer or be able to voice our truth, because we're still processing, we're still learning. But I tell you what, the people that are working on this collaboration are always open, always receptive to any information or a better way to express and present our tools out there, because we've got advocates and allies like this that are creating these tools to speak the language and to just create a safe space for us as educators to learn and to share with others, whether it's parent-teacher language and or being a resource, or just listening, coming from a place of being open and receptive to information is also good too.
I love that. What you shared from one of the community members and what was her inspiration. Mm-hmm. And that community member, she developed a lot of the slides around transgender issues, because she wanted to go deep and educate herself and educate others about these issues. And that's what's so great too about this collaborative aspect of working on the collaborative slideshows, is we learn so much as we're doing it.
We do. and the way that we can use this, like we've talked, Kim and I both agree that these are great resources for us, for self-education, professional development, resources later on, and also to start the dialogue with students. Maybe for online teachers, if you're not associated with a school, let's start thinking about it. If you can think of a way that you would like to use this tool in a classroom or an online setting, a peer group setting, the applications are endless. If you have a creative idea, let's drop it in the comment and share how you're going to use this tool. Kim, can you think of other ways, or which age group that you've seen a lot more of the updated slides than I think I have, but I saw some cute stuff in there, some really nice information.
I think it could be applicable to all different ages, different slides at different times. So that's the other great thing about these collaborative projects, is it doesn't, just because it's set up as kind of a slide show presentation, it doesn't mean it's chronological, and it doesn't mean that it's linear. So you can just take one read aloud that's hyperlinked on slide 13, a read aloud of a picture book, and that could be where you go with your practice. And so it could be kind of a book club discussion with younger kids if y'all are looking at a picture book, or it could be with middle school kids or fourth and fifth graders if you're talking about gender identity. So it really depends on what your purpose is and what the context is. I think it could be adapted up and down vertically for different grade levels and different configurations, whether it's whole class, one-on-one, small group, inside a traditional brick and mortar school, or in a more informal learning environment. So that's the beauty of this as well. Just because it's set up that way, it doesn't mean it's chronological or linear. So you can always kind of cherry pick where you want to go and what fits in with what you're planning to cover.
I think that you put it beautifully, that we can use whatever information is needed at that time. And I really, because my heart is literacy and just having access to material that people can connect to. I think Kim speaks my language all the time when it comes to books, and I love it. I love it. My heart is just singing right now to know that maybe one of the books that was presented and shared will help spur that conversation. But not even the conversation. Think about the connection that you get to your favorite quotation, your favorite piece of literature, and why it makes your heart sing. It's so important, that gift, to have access to things and people and activities and thoughts and ideas that you can connect with. That's why I think that there's my bias, that I feel like that part is it just speaks so much that we can connect through books and through pictures. They look like me, they sound like me, they experience challenges like me. One of the biggest things that we as humans go through life doing is seeking connection, and why we get caught sometimes in grouping in certain ways, and it's good to know the language and to understand that, oh, you know what, that wasn't as inclusive as I meant it to be.
I always say we need to own our awkward. It's okay that we're learning alongside everyone else. I mean, that's the beauty of education, is we should be lifelong learners, and it's okay not to know, and it's okay to ask students, because they might be more versed in these topics and how they talk about these topics more than someone who's older. And so it's okay to not know, and it's okay to fumble our way through knowledge sometimes, but we also need to make sure that we're not placing the onus of educating ourselves on the people who are often most vulnerable and most marginalized, which is another reason I love these kinds of projects, because it's placing how I learn about these topics on me. It's not saying, oh, you're part of the LGBTQ community, tell me what I should know. And I do identify, I am part of the LGBTQ plus community, but I think it's important that so often we place what we don't know on those who have been most historically and politically marginalized. And it's not their role to educate those in the dominant culture or those with most privilege. And so I think it's okay to own our awkward. It's okay to ask questions, but we also need to do our due diligence and educate ourselves on these issues, and not just say, oh, what do I need to know? Or how can I be a better ally? Or how can I be a better advocate? we need to also educate ourselves on these issues and know how we're coming to the table. And that way we're better informed with our questions. We're better informed when we seek answers. We're better informed when we are in the classroom. So for example, I know oftentimes if you are coming from maybe a heteronormative background, we often express support through broadcasting our support. Oh, my best friend's gay, so I'm cool, or I have a student who uses they as their gendered pronouns, so I'm up on these issues. And it's like, well, is that student might use the they pronoun with you, but are they comfortable using the they pronoun with their families?
Right.
Are they comfortable using the they pronoun with other teachers where they might? And so sometimes even coming out with other gender identities, or coming out with a non-heteronormative sexual orientation, sometimes there's layers of coming out. So if you're going to be a safe place for a student, broadcasting their identity might be an assumption you're making. And so maybe a student feels safe with you and they share that with you, but you need to make sure that have they also come out in different levels and different realms and with different people. And so even like that, I think is things we need to be aware of. Does that make sense?
Oh, it absolutely makes sense. Like you said, putting the onus on someone else. This project has a great, the benefit of using this project is that it kind of offers a starting point for maybe somebody that doesn't understand. But like you said, I often say this, when we're learning, if you're going through life, you're learning. And like you said, we can stumble through, we can fumble, but one thing that's not okay is to put the responsibility of our thoughts and ideas, base it on one experience, one interaction, one engagement, and then all of a sudden we're experts. That's not the case. People have to go to school for many years to become a surgeon, and we have to, everything being open to is accepting ourselves, that we are growing and that we're learning, and that, like you said, we have to take responsibility for how far we go with learning the language, and that might shape our experiences, and it definitely will shape our worldview as we go. And one thing I did want to speak on was the tools, the language, and how to be understanding and receptive. Maybe the individual, the student or individual that we are engaging with is also learning who they are as themselves. You talked about layers, and you said maybe they're comfortable with this layer and they haven't really talked about romance or sexuality and relationships in intimacy, because these are complex emotions. These are complex processes that take us forever to understand. And if we are not providing basically a safe space, it's okay, if you want a distance, but if you are really thinking about being an advocate, an ally, feeling that before that I felt like an ally, I felt like an advocate because I believed certain things. I had certain experiences, and I want others to have that experience, or rights, absolute rights. So, but it doesn't stop there. I have to accept that maybe my advocacy journey takes another step forward because the information is different, and my experience or my position changes, and I have the opportunity to teach and share information to others, so that now my little circle gets a little bit bigger, and other individuals' circle gets a little bit bigger with all the information that we go. Like I was sharing earlier, I have certain people in my circle or my friendship, my connection network, that I rely on for resources when I don't have the answer. And then I learn, and it's okay to say that you don't know the language, or the vocabulary. It's okay. But as your experience deems it, why not?
That's great points. And just because we keep talking about some of the topics, I just wanted to I'm going to eyeball some of the slides that are in.
I was going to put one up and I said, oh, it hasn't been released yet.
Right. So I'm just going to kind of narrate some of it. So
that's good, yes.
Some of the things that appear on the slides are looking at a transgender inclusive mini library. And so it's a great slide, and it has different books specifically on transgender youth or transgender experience. And then those are hyperlinked. And there are 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. There's over 12 books that are in that library. Then there's also terminology that's talked about. So what do the letters mean? LGBTQ. And that's specific to sexual orientation, which is separate than gender identity. And so there's other slides that specifically talk about gender identity. And a lot of times those are conflated, and they're separate concepts. Sexual orientation has one set of identity markers and self-identification categories, and those could be expanding and evolving as long as we walk the earth. And then there's gender identity, which has another set of identity markers or identity categories. And so those are separate. So those are explored in the slides. Let me see what else. What do the letters mean? What does the plus sign mean in LGBTQ? So it goes into other terminology and language like intersex, asexual, pansexual, and 2S, two-spirit. And that's even interesting because that comes from First Nations. Some First Nation had a conceptualization around two-spirit, and the term was used by Indigenous communities to describe people with varying identities and sexual orientations. So this happened centuries ago, where this was a concept that was readily accepted in certain communities. And there's more slides about gender, and there's over 64 terms that can describe gender, which is interesting. Then there's also the award-winning short film, Love is Love, and it's called In a Heartbeat is the short film. So there's access to that, and it's an animated short that talks about these boys who are discovering they might not fit the heteronormative script in their own lives. And then there's also a slide about pronouns, and then a clip to a video around that. There also was talk about why Latinx. Why did Latinx become a term? And that's also showing the evolution of language and kind of how we can be more inclusive, because Latino and Latina is gendered in a dichotomous kind of way. You're Latino, meaning you're masculine or male, or Latina, you're feminine or female. And so even that has kind of been problematized in some circles. And that's where one reason that Latinx became a new, how it was born. And then there's also, I don't know if you've seen, there's Latine, where we start using the E instead of the O and the A. So like,
no, I have seen it, but I hadn't explored it yet.
Yeah, so instead of, and I'm starting to see that in some circles. So like even teachers might say, instead of niños y niñas, they'll say niñes. And so there's pushback.
And I have seen the pushback, where, especially when we're talking about languages and things like that. But you made a really good point. When there is a need to define something, when there is a need to name something, or we find the language. We find the language and we use it in our conversation, because there are specifics. There are things that make it easier to express when we have something to name. Right. But yes, I've seen some of those discussions.
Yes, and very articulate on all sides. Yes. And so hopefully we come to these discussions with an open mind, and really try and listen. And I think the most important thing is, are we listening to those who feel most marginalized in the conversation? Because sometimes we come to a conversation that might have multiple angles and multiple sides, and we think we're being very rational in that conversation. But sometimes if you're coming from a place of privilege, so for example, in this conversation, you might be cisgendered, where you self-identify as the gender you were assigned at birth. So you have privilege there, or you might self-identify and live as a heterosexual, right? So you have privilege. So when you come to the conversation, you already have privilege, and you don't really have much to lose because you're privileged in so many ways in our society. So when you come to these conversations, I just encourage everyone to think who's been most hurt, or who has been politically, historically, educationally, academically, physically marginalized by the topic. Because those are the voices we need to listen to the most and not talk as much. Because that representation is really important, that we make room for those voices at the table, and we really kind of take that in. That's a great question. And I think it goes back to making sure you understand that the educator understands their own position and their own positionality, that they are reflective of maybe how they feel about these issues and how those thoughts and beliefs came into being. Yeah. And maybe sometimes the silences are the loudest. And so there's a reason that these are recent topics, because they've been pushed down and been a subject of oppression for millennia, and still are. I mean, there are still hate crimes that happen, and that countries that homosexuality is criminalized, not just looked down upon, but criminalized, that you can be thrown in jail or worse by your government, and it's sanctioned. And so we have to be aware that these topics, it's not just a educational debate to have.
No.
These are real life and death topics sometimes for those who self-identify in non-dominant ways. And so I think that would be the first step, Victoria.
Recognizing
for an educator to recognize what narratives we've grown up with and where our beliefs are, and then come to it with, I guess, do your research before you want to broach some of these topics, and then also be very open with your own learning, maybe. But I know that places you in a vulnerable position sometimes, and that's where I think you need to kind of sit with these topics a little bit in your own internal investigation. So you're more aware of how you might respond.
And I love that you share this, because we're really excited about the project, and we talk about how we could introduce the information, that we can cherry pick different information, figure, this, I can use this right now, or I am comfortable with this right now, because maybe our next step is to learn how to introduce different topics or be available, or we don't know how our students are going to respond, or who our conversation is going to respond. These are, I don't want to say just, take that out. I want to say that these resources, or this collaboration of information, is there to recognize and address that the conversation is in process. It is always happening, because we are internally investigating ourselves, our own identities, our own narratives, and where we fit into all of the dialogue. learning what feels right for us. And knowing, again, we always go back to, sometimes you're going to make a mistake. It's okay, but it takes courage to address it. It takes courage to acknowledge it, and it takes courage to move on. And how we go from maybe a verbal faux pas, or, a social something that's awkward. I love, and I want to own this, where you said, own your awkward. If we're not having uncomfortable conversations or feeling awkward when we talk about things, then it's going to, I'm not saying just stay in a perpetual state of anxiety and stress, but I want to say that our growth comes from these moments. Our understanding comes from these moments. And just 2 or 3 seconds of being uncomfortable to say, or even flesh out a concept or a thought or idea, can make such a difference in somebody's life. That there has been loss and grief and pain because, and I'll add myself, we have failed in some moments, or weren't able to be open in those moments, or know exactly what or how or what to say and do. Know that from this point on. Yes, so I want to say I recognize that.
I love that. And it makes me think about and make a connection to the conversations around anti-racism that are happening. And there's a professor and a theorist, and now I cannot think of his name right now, but he talks about anti-racism. And I'm paraphrasing, but if you're not actively anti-racist, like actively pursuing the path to combat racism, then you're not doing enough. And so it really has turned light bulbs on for a lot of people, that it's like, oh, well, I didn't ever take a position. I mean, I'm not racist.
Right.
But so you might not be racist, but are you anti-racist? Are you actively contributing to combating racism? And I think we can make some of those same parallels with the conversations around LGBTQ plus issues and around gender identity issues. Is we might have a lot of educators out there who say, I don't discriminate against LGBTQ plus youth. I accept that there are multiple gender identities. You can live how you want to live, but I'm not comfortable going there. And so we can ask the same question in a way. And I know that this can be difficult because it might have to do with your context. It might have to do with your district. It might have to do with your administration. It might have to do with your students' parents. So it can get really tricky. But in what ways are we anti-discriminate?
Yeah, I love this.
We might not discriminate. We might make safe places for our students, but are we actively being inclusive?
So you made two things just popped into my head that really resonate with how to create the safe space, using this information and not missing those opportunities. Like you said, actively anti-racist means recognizing that moment, doing the gut check that says, did they say what I think they just said? And maybe calling people out, calling ourselves out. I know that in recently, this is why this speaks to me. Sometimes when you miss it, my experience, I'm not going to say the term that I heard, but it was, my gut told me something wasn't right about this phrase. And I was so shocked in that moment to have heard it so casually used and then rationalized, because I had not heard the term. I was even deeply more wounded because my processing wasn't happening fast enough and my voice wasn't able to be heard in that moment. So I want to say that was my wake-up call. And unfortunately, these kinds of wake-up calls happen a little more often than I would like. And the way that I am choosing, because it is a choice, to recognize this is to really listen to my gut. If I'm uncomfortable, somebody else is uncomfortable. And it's okay to recognize that awkwardness and say, I don't necessarily know exactly why that's offensive, but right now I'm not feeling okay. Can you explain yourself? Or use those conversation, those courageous conversation phrases. I don't understand. Could you explain that a little bit more? All those things, but when you're in that moment though, Kim, I'm telling you, it takes you out of body. It really does.
It does. And then, and I think we also need to give ourselves grace, and understand that that's also part of our process in getting closer to who we want to be tomorrow, who we want to be next week. And so sometimes, because look at what that one instance of you being silent, but you were also silenced.
Right.
Because it was so shocking to you. And so I think you also need to recognize what a learning opportunity you made that out for yourself. And there's beauty in that. And then you have made deliberate decisions based on that one encounter. And it's kind of like Maya Angelou, I'm paraphrasing, but where she says, when we know better, we do better. And so we also need to recognize that, 8-10 years ago, the 64 gender identity terms and phrases were not on most people's radar. The idea that could even exist. Now, it was on some people's radar, the most marginalized, probably who have questioned their gender identity or have had loved ones question their gender identity. But in the mainstream, in quotes, there's been progress. And so there's progress even in that situation where you were not comfortable saying something, or were so dumbfounded it was like, I don't even know what to say, right? Yeah. So I think that we all need to recognize that that's all of us growing too. Mm-hmm. Oh, and the professor and theorist who writes about anti-racism, and he actually has a children's book called Antiracist Baby, his name is Ibram Kendi, Kendi. So that's who I blanked out on. And so some of the others,
I was looking it up. So if you saw me look down, I was looking it up, but because I didn't want to disconnect. I said, okay, I'm going to put that down. But for all of our observers, our participants in our comments and in our groups, or just chatting with us here today, just know that we are going to put some of the definitions for some of the language that we've used, just so that if you are unsure or don't know, we're going to have those linked up, well, not linked, but outlined for you, and have the resource that Kim just shared with us. And I'm so excited. I can't wait to go back, and the resource with Maya Angelou. We're just going to get all of that here for you, because why? We want that conversation to keep going. And just like ours, just like our conversation right here, we're learning and exploring and expressing some of the maybe failures or our goals. We want everybody to share in this conversation. So
And I think, I wanted to go through just a few more slides.
Yes.
Just so people, when they know, when they seek out the resource, what else is available. Then there's quite a few biographies that highlight activists, artists, educators who have, if they're no longer with us, or who still have influence, or who have identified as LGBTQ or in other ways. So my slide, for example, I talk about Gloria Anzaldúa, Dr. Gloria Anzaldúa. She's from the Rio Grande Valley, and she was a Chicana, lesbian, feminist, poet, writer, cultural theorist. If you've ever talked about Borderlands, that's her groundbreaking book. And then she's also wrote some children's books. And so I linked that in the slideshow. And it talks about Prietita is the character in her books. And one of them is a take on La Llorona. And it's actually, La Llorona turns out to be a curandera who is a medicine woman. And so it plays on a lot of really interesting narratives and folklore. And it has, a Tejana Latina child at the center of the book. And so I have those highlighted, and then some of her poetry and some of her interviews. Then there's also pop culture icons like Billy Porter, Daniel Quasar, who was the creator of the Pride redesign, Monica Helms, some transgender rights advocates, Sylvia Rivera, Marsha Johnson, Laverne Cox, India Moore, Pauline Park, MJ Rodriguez. Some of those have had acting roles on the series Pose, but others politicians or work in corporate America. And then there's more about pronouns, why representation matters, more about transgender and gender nonconforming community. And I think I just gave y'all a brief whirlwind tour of what's out there.
Just know that there's a lot of information wherever you are in your journey. Just recognize that this is a resource that many teachers are collaborated to get as much as they could out, and that we are building this as we go. And I know that this is something that we will revisit, and we will continue to converse and hopefully empower others to be their true selves.
Yes, I love that. And I think one of my closing thoughts on this is really thinking about, a lot of the topics we've covered in our short plática, our little conversation, is banner identities or umbrella identities. But under all those are kids, are individuals who are feeling it out and figuring it out and navigating this world. And so, sometimes we can debate till the cows come home on what bathroom can be used or who can play sports on what teams. And those might be important conversations, but behind those conversations are kids. And I think that's what inspired a lot of us on this project is, yes, it's important to educate ourselves on terminology, on phrasing, on the evolution of language and these concepts. But just remember, behind the debates and behind the multiple sides of every topic, there are kids. And so that's what I really wanted to just kind of drive home.
I resonate with that. I think that the heart of the message is that these resources are available, the conversations are there, and to plant the seed for a safe space so that we recognize the people, that we, using the language and the feelings behind, the feelings in the moment, whether they're challenging our belief system or pushing our boundaries, and I'm speaking from my experience right there, but or empowering somebody to have another conversation later with somebody else. We're part of the process, and as long as we participate in that journey from an open space, I think we've got the message. Another member from our group, and I'll share this as kind of a closing, is that it speaks to what you said. I wanted to do this because I do not want to be out of touch. I wanted to do this because no matter what I do or say, her intentions are from a place of no hurt, no harm. So some of that is learning and coming from a place of vulnerability, and then moving forward with the dialogue and learning. So I am so excited. I'm so excited for this project. I'm excited to hear what everybody's experiences using the tools, how they feel about the presentation that is going to go out for everybody, and just to hear everybody's story.
Yes, and just like African American Heritage Month is 1 month a year doesn't mean we don't use those resources all year, and we should. And same thing could be said with the remainder of Asian American Heritage Month. This month, even though it's highlighted this month, we can use those resources all year round, as we should. And so even though Pride Month falls in most people's summer, we can use this presentation and weave those resources throughout the year.
I agree. I love it. All right, everybody. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.